Hi everyone, welcome to this Academic Live episode 87. I'm Pania, Newell, one of your hosts today, and I'm joined by my awesome co-host, Lucy Zhang.
Hi, everyone.
So with all the buzz around facilities and administration costs or indirect costs or overhead costs, typically in academia referred to as F&A, we thought it's better to dedicate an episode and discuss this mysterious F&A and where does the fund go and how it's being spent at universities and how universities function with lower F&A rates. Before we start, it would be good to just get a little bit history of an F&A. It seems that based on the search that I did in early 1900s, universities primarily were relying on direct funding from states and private sectors. And after Second World War, the government decided to support these growing administrations and operation infrastructures and help them to conduct more cutting-edge research. Then federal funding, mainly from NIH, National Institutes of Health, and also National Science Foundations, increased. They started establishing more formal way of these indirect costs. So their purpose was basically to set a system to help universities to facilitate the maintenance, administration supports for grant processing and doing research compliance for IRB and safety protocols that many health-related researchers would benefit from. So in 1970s, the Office of Management and Budget introduced this formal guidance, and then F&A rates, it started by negotiations between every institutions with federal agencies, and they set these rates. So these rates varied over the years, but currently it goes to very high numbers between 50 to almost 70%. So Lucy, I have a quiz for you. You've been in academia for long, so can you tell me some of the institutions that they have highest F&A within United States?
All right. A quick Google search can give us some good numbers. So the highest one is at Harvard University. Current F&A rate is at 69%. So that's really the highest that we could find. And then other high F&A rates, Yale goes in second, 67.5%. And then followed by that is Princeton at 64. My university RPI is at 65, Northwestern is at 60, Berkeley at 60.5, etc., etc.
It seems that wherever you went, they have high F&A rates, Northwestern, RPI.
I know, right? Well, the campuses are beautiful, so.
Well, yeah, so I guess they are spending the money wisely. This is interesting because it seems that most of these, they are private or semi-private R1 institutions with a lot of research going on. And that's probably explaining why they have higher F&A rate negotiations.
So because if you look at private institutions and very intensive research institutions, the F&A rates were established to perform research. That was, I believe, how the rates are determined is how much do you need in order to sustain your research. So I'm not so surprised that R1 institutions would have this high rates. So I think that's what's related. Now, in terms of public institutions versus private, I'm guessing some of that probably come from the state. Yeah, that's probably why. But Berkeley is also pretty high. So, that's a public institution.
I'm not F&A rate expert. I haven't been involved with any of the negotiations, but maybe the state of California probably things are also very expensive too. So that might be a contributing factor. So how about other countries? Do you have any ideas about, these are obviously R1 institutions in United States. What do you think about the F&A rates in other countries?
Wow, yeah. So that's actually a very interesting find. US currently has the highest F&A rates for federally funded grants at 50 to 60% on average. And in Europe, it's at 25%. And then UK is at 20 to 30%. Canada is about the same, around 25 to 30%. Australia is a little higher at 30 to 40. Japan at 20 to 30. Germany by itself is 20 to 30. So overall, looks like the rest of the world are relatively low, somewhere between 20 to 35 to 40 range, and US is particularly high.
Yeah, so it's, to me, I don't know, it's interesting that how we are almost double in terms of the F&A rate comparing to all these countries, that they are contributing significantly to research. In some fields, actually, European countries are now leading the fields comparing to US, but it's still, I don't know, to me, these numbers are shocking in a good way and also in a bad way. Like if they can get their research done with this lower F&A rate, so there might be a possibility for us too. I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure if, as we're speaking, Europe is really much better. I don't know if they're really leading, but I think if we also keep at a low rate, it's going to be, they will be leading. In fact, I think there's already a call as soon as NSF announces 15% as a cap. So I think for years, this rate that we are currently experiencing at 50 to 60 wasn't set at that rate from day one. It was also gradually increased to this rate. I also think that as a result, the US research as a whole, the entire research enterprise had grown significantly over the years as well. So I think the US had been leading for decades, for the last maybe 5 or 6 decades, because of this rate being high. Now, how it's going to affect us in the US from here on with the low rates, we don't know.
So maybe this is a good transition to talk about some of the advantages of F&A and talking about how these F&A funds are being spent at universities. So some of the things that I've been looking with all these announcements that the F&A rate dropping to 15%, as you pointed out, I wanted to see what's the impact on me and my career, and then also what's the impact in my institution. So I try to get this information. Some of them are very difficult and challenging. It's like so many pie charts after pie charts after pie charts, and it's like where the money is going. But overall, I learned that the advantages of having this F&A is research infrastructures. So many of the user facilities at universities and conducting research in those facilities is being subsidized through this F&A for the researchers of the institutions. And then supporting grant administrations and then the competitions that they are happening across the universities, workshops or trainings that they are happening at the regional level to advance research, all are being supported by F&A. But I also learned that some of the salaries of the administrations are covered, not 100%, but some of their salaries, and also some of the startups are coming from F&A. Do you know any other use of the F&A that I forgot to mention?
Well, I think that covers pretty much the majority of it. I mean, certainly keep the lights on, right? Have buildings that needs maintenance. You need light bulbs, you need electricity. And so all of those, you need, someone to clean up, pick up garbage every day. So those are all staff, right? So that they would help you or help sustain the building infrastructure. Something breaks, like you need a hood for your lab and all that. It doesn't just come out of a particular pocket. It's all part of that as a building maintenance. I think those are huge costs. And like you said, the supporting people, supporting grants administrations, right? So when we write a grant, someone looks over the budget, someone submits it, hit the button. You can't do it yourself. You need people to do that. So those people, and also whoever manages your grant once you have one, hopefully keep your budget in check and all those. So I almost feel like for R1 type of institutions, those are necessary research infrastructures that you have to put in place. And like anything, bureaucracy only grows. That's the definition of bureaucracy. So as soon as you have an infrastructure, it will only grow. And I think that's maybe why it kind of got to where we are today. You want to keep your university competitive, you better have this type of support, right?
So, what are the challenges and criticisms that we are hearing about FNA? Like, I agree that yes, for research and to keep moving and then keeping the status of the R1 institutions at the R1 level, these are required. But do we really need to pay this high FNA? Or can we get the research done with half of that, like Europeans?
I don't know. I'm sure if people are being put in a survival mode, they all can survive. I think if we don't have that income to maintain research infrastructure, start closing down buildings, the buildings that require the most amount of money to maintain, and then see how much that can save you. And that, of course, has to be done very carefully because you don't want to get rid of everything that will give you that support. Because, for example, closing down building is probably easier than getting rid of people, right? Because if one day you want to build back up, you can't just find the right people anymore. And same thing with that entire infrastructure. I think people at administrative level, they really need to think about what is the most mission critical to perform the necessary research just to maintain. So I think we're at this level at the moment is like at the survival mode. What is the minimum you can have in order to just maintain or just to function minimally? One criticism that a lot of people have in regard to high indirect cost is really lack of transparency. This is my personal observation. Is really because they're basically being collected, right? So me as an individual faculty, I write a grant, and then 65 goes to somewhere I don't know because they're not meant to be known, right? They're not
Yes.
meant to come back to support my particular research project. They're meant to go into a central pot. Now, who controls that central pot is not me, right? So it's not the PI who has a control, who can oversee where that money goes. So it goes to a central pot. Now, someone in each institution decides where it goes and how they're being distributed. Now, of course, a lot of that accounting has to go hand in hand with other source of quote unquote income, like tuition or state funding or all of that. So from the university's point of view, the research indirect costs that we collect, it goes to that big pot of money. So that's why it's, when you say, well, can some of that supports faculty startup? That's how we sustain as a institution. We need to hire people. In order to hire good people, we have to give them startup. So it's like you're contributing towards the institution who can use the money, hopefully wisely, to make it better and better.
But the transparency is the key that I feel that many faculty that I talk to, they feel not knowing how this money is being used. We know the big picture. Yeah, a startup, because whenever you complain, they say, oh, your startup came from FNA. But if there was transparency, like I try to figure out what happens to FNA in my own institution. There are documents after documents after documents, but there are all these pie charts that keep growing and then shrinking. And I was like, I can't understand what's happening. But as you said, it's meant to be, because it's meant not anybody figuring it out, right? The whole system is like, but if I we all want to be part of a very healthy ecosystem. We want to be part of a system that it trusts us and we don't feel betrayed. We don't feel that we are slaves and, writing proposal, and they keep asking us to write more and more and more because, 65%, or in my case, luckily lower percentage goes to somebody. But if there is transparency, if I know that this money is going to be used for whatever reason, I think that I would trust more in the system. And still, there would be some people that they would be upset about 65%, or those high percentage. But I think that the majority of people, when they have a better understanding of how the fund is being used, they will be more accepted paying higher price.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And I think because it's not disclosed, so from a faculty point of view, right? So it's basically, I work so hard and I earn this money and I give some share to you as overhead, and then you're just gonna do whatever you want. Like, I don't hear anything afterwards, basically. I'm not sure how that can be done, like what kind of disclosure of how everything is spent can be done. I'm not sure if any university is willing to disclose that, at least publicly. Maybe they do internally.
But I think that's the big problem, right? And that's why all institutions are panicking with this lower rate, right? Because there are some other expenses that they are not disclosing and we don't know how it's being spent. And that's like why I'm not panicking, because I'm writing my proposal and I don't care if it's 15% or 65%, right? But those people that are distributing these know more, and I wish that they were disclosing it. But based on my search, it seems that some of these goes to the president's salary, to the VPR's salary, to the provost salary, not 100%, but some of it. And I didn't check to see if the football coach gets any of this or
That
not.
would be pretty funny.
Yes,
Yes.
that would be really fun. So probably as we are moving forward, I don't think the FNA rates are gonna stay as high. Most these agencies, yes, they are gonna have more negotiations, but who knows? Maybe we might settle in like a rate similar to Europe, like 20 to 30%, not 15%, but not as high as 69% or whatever. But I think that in order to survive, institutions, they need to have a very different mindset in spending it, in communicating with researchers, with their staff, with everybody. So there would be like a transparency, like there would be a website that you can see exactly like how much money came into that big pot of money and how it's being spent. I don't know if it's ever going to happen or not, but I think that I would feel much, much fuzzier and comfortable writing proposals with whatever rate that they are asking me.
Yeah, I think you and I are talking rainbows here, right? Because we don't really know what goes behind the scenes and, what is allowed to be shared. But I do believe communications, like better communications, is really the key. I don't know how the level of transparency is needed to make people comfortable with the overhead rates. If you talk to administrator, they will say that the rate, even though we do impose, say, 65% of indirect cost, but in reality, we don't impose that cost on tuition, right? For example, we charge a discounted
Yes.
tuition, which is, say, $30,000, and that's part of the direct cost, but that part is not being overheaded. So if you do a real overhead rate, it's actually about somewhere between 25 to 30%. Right? So if you purely add up the total, not the modified total direct, but the total direct cost, and use the indirect cost and then do that division, it's actually much lower than 50 to 60%. So I don't know if that's part of the calculation that's inconsistent with other countries or something. I have no idea. But that would probably give us a different set of numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but our tuition is not that high. So you guys are obviously in different league. It's higher. But most of the states, universities, the tuitions are not that high. So I don't think that it would bring it down from like 50, for my case is 55% almost to half. Because when I write the budget, it's like very, very minimal for the tuition that we put. So some interesting things that throughout my search I found out is that the distributions of the FNA and what are the models out there. Obviously, most of these schools, they don't disclose it, but generally they said that 20 to 30% it goes to the administration and 10 to 20% goes to the VPR office and 40 to 60% combined goes back to colleges, departments, like their startups and things like that. So if we go with the lower FNA rate, all of this distribution, it might be shifted, but hopefully more stays within the research and then research facilities and maintaining that. So what do you think would be the potential impact of these lower FNA rates that now being proposed by various funding agencies?
Well, for sure, the potential impact is that the university gets less. I mean, that's a direct. It's perhaps when it goes lower, I'm really thinking certain research infrastructures cannot be kept up, especially the high costing ones. Say a clean room, right? A clean room needs a lot of maintenance and needs a lot of upkeeping. The equipment needs to run, the air filter and all that. In the worst case scenario, some of that might have to shut down or eliminate or reduce number of users to keep the cost down. That's for sure the most impactful is directly to the researchers themselves. Unfortunately, I think rather than impacting a central administration, it probably will trickle down to individual PIs. I'm
So
afraid.
the impact on researcher would be much higher than the impact on the administration.
One thing though, I think universities will start thinking about shifting numbers instead of a typical charge that you wouldn't think about. So for example, printer paper. So we never charge that. Who's going to pay for it? And similarly, our tuition discount might just simply disappear. So we might need to start charging full tuition. End up being the same. If you do that calculation, you add all of those back into as the direct cost, total number being the same.
So that's why I'm thinking that the whole enterprise needs to be reshaped. We need to think differently because at the end, as you are saying, all the pressure comes back to the PIs. And we didn't sign up for any of this. I think probably the tenure and promotion needs to be reevaluated, reassessed. We should not expect people to bring millions of dollars to get tenures, but instead provide them with the means to do higher and better quality of research and less stress. I think that the universities and academia, they need to reinvent themselves. How come when we get the money from industry, they don't let you have a high FNA? Maybe we should have some centralized labs or facilities that it's run by government, industry, or collaborations across them. But I think at this point, we should keep the discussion open, and then also universities, I expect, I don't know if that's happening in other institutions, but I think that it should be a not one-way conversation that, oh, you need to write now more proposals to cover up for this shortage of the FNA. Maybe have town halls that they can hear researchers and students. There are many facilities that I don't use, but obviously, as part of the FNA, we are supporting them. Can I take my research and do it at the national labs facilities, right? So they have their own overhead. Are there other models? I don't know how European, Canadian, and other countries or Australians are working, but all I know, none of the professors that I talk with write this many proposals as US researchers. They write one or two because their system is not based on the size.
Yeah, we're running business, right? So you
Yeah.
have to have income, you have to have revenue in order to keep your doors open. So that's the financial model that over the years, the US institutions have built. So a lot of institutions, research is not just research. Research is also part of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it becomes important. It's not because it's important because it's good to have. It's important because there's a source of income.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think with this change or potentially change, we don't know how it's going to play out in the court. At least it gets people to start talking and start thinking, for better or for worse.
Yeah, yeah. I think that at the end of the day, I believe whether it's a lower rate or higher rate, as you pointed out, we learn to survive. Good researchers can find a way. It's going to be stressful. I'm not saying that it's easy and everything is going to be very smooth, but I think that those that have good ideas and they've been doing solid work, they will continue and they will survive. It will be harder for the junior faculty that they are coming in and they need to navigate this change. For them, it's much harder than us. But let's hope for the best. Hopefully, as you said, this discussion leads to more transparency.
Absolutely. And keep
So,
on doing the good work.
yes.
Don't stop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So whether it's 15% or 20 or 100%, we need to submit those proposals and make sure that we follow a routine. So whether you think FNA is a lifeline or a burden, one thing is clear. It plays a huge role in how we do science today. And understanding where those dollars go isn't just about budgets. It's about value. Let's hope we find better ways to do research, cheaper, more efficient, and still driven by curiosity and impact. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.